I started my job at Thompson Family Funeral Home in Portland, Maine 6 months ago. The pay was decent, the hours mostly predictable, and the work itself, well, it wasn't for everyone, but it suited me fine. The small, century-old business operated out of a converted Victorian house with dark green siding and white trim, sitting between maple trees that were probably as old as the building itself. Robert and Sarah Thompson ran the place with the quiet efficiency of people who'd been in the business for decades. Robert handled most of the client meetings, and Sarah managed the paperwork and the finances. They were in their late 50s, and the funeral home had been in Robert's family for 3 generations. They hired me to handle body preparation, casket arrangements, and occasional night shifts when someone passed and needed immediate transport. My background was actually in electrical engineering, but after a corporate layoff and some thinking about my life, I'd found myself drawn to this line of work. There was something honest about it, helping families through their worst moments, treating the dead with dignity. Most days were predictable. Prepare the bodies, arrange the flowers, make sure the sound system worked for the services. That predictability ended when Emily Parker walked in. It was a Tuesday morning in early October. The air outside had that crisp fall feeling, leaves crunching under my shoes as I'd walked from my car to the funeral home. I was organizing pamphlets in the front room when the bell above the door rang. She was maybe in her early 40s, blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, wearing a black coat buttoned up to her neck even though the weather wasn't that cold. Her face looked tired with dark circles under her eyes, but that wasn't unusual for someone making funeral arrangements. "I need to plan a service for my son," she said without preamble. Her voice was flat, controlled in a way that suggested she was working hard to keep it that way. I nodded and led her to one of the consultation rooms, small spaces with comfortable chairs and boxes of tissues placed strategically on side tables. Robert was out meeting with suppliers, so I would handle the initial consultation. "I'm James Wilson," I said, offering my hand. "Emily Parker," she replied, her handshake brief and cool. As we sat down, she pulled out a folder of documents and placed it on the table between us. My son Michael was 17. He died in a car accident 3 days ago. I expressed my condolences, which she acknowledged with a small nod before continuing. "The medical examiner has released his body. I want a closed casket service, simple, no viewing hours, just the burial." I took notes as she spoke, asking the standard questions about service preferences, religious considerations, obituary information. She answered everything, efficiently, almost mechanically, until we got to the casket selection. "I'd like to see your options," she said. I showed her our catalog, and she selected a mid-range model without much deliberation. Then she looked up at me, her gray eyes suddenly intense. "I have a special request." People often had special requests, personal items they wanted placed with the deceased, specific music, unusual dress requirements. I nodded encouragingly. "I want to place a camera inside Michael's casket, to record him during the funeral and burial." I tried to keep my expression neutral, though I'm sure surprise flickered across my face. "A camera?" I repeated. "Yes, small, battery-powered. It would be attached to the inside of the lid, angled toward his face. It wouldn't be visible to anyone attending the service." I moved in my chair. "May I ask why you'd want that, Mrs. Parker?" Her posture stiffened. "I have concerns that the doctors may have misdiagnosed his death." This wasn't the first time I'd heard something like this. Grief sometimes shows up as denial, and families occasionally have doubts about what doctors tell them. "I understand your concern," I said carefully, "but I've reviewed the transfer paperwork from the medical examiner. The documentation of your son's injuries is quite extensive." "I'm aware of what the report says," she replied, her tone sharpening. "This is important to me, Mr. Wilson. The camera will be completely hidden. No one will know it's there except you and me." I told her I would need to consult with Robert, which seemed to irritate her, but she agreed to wait. I excused myself and called Robert on his cell phone, stepping into the hallway for privacy. "It's unusual," Robert said after I explained the situation, but not unheard of. Some families have cultural or religious reasons for monitoring the deceased. She thinks he might not be dead, I clarified. Robert was quiet for a moment. The medical examiner's report is definitive. Multiple traumatic injuries, including severe head trauma. There's no question. Then this is likely part of her grieving process, Robert said. As long as the camera doesn't interfere with our services or violate any regulations, we can accommodate her request. It might help her accept the reality of her loss. I returned to the consultation room and informed Emily that we would allow the camera. The relief on her face was immediate, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I'll bring the camera tomorrow when I bring his clothes." The next day, Emily arrived with a small duffel bag containing Michael's burial clothes, a simple dark suit, and a small black camera about the size of a deck of cards. It had a tiny lens and what looked like a memory card slot. "It has a 30-hour battery life," she explained. "More than enough time to capture the funeral and several hours afterward." I nodded, taking the camera. "I'll make sure it's properly positioned." Michael's body arrived that afternoon. The accident had been bad. His face was mostly intact, but showed injuries that our mortuary techniques could only partly hide. I prepared him with the same care I gave all the deceased, dressing him in the clothes his mother had provided and doing the standard embalming procedure. When it came time to set up the camera, I felt really uncomfortable. It seemed wrong to record someone in death like this, but I'd given my word. I stuck the small device to the inside of the casket lid with double-sided tape Emily had provided, pointing it toward Michael's face as she asked. I made sure it was recording. A small red light showed it was working, before closing the casket. The funeral was held 2 days later. Not many people came, just Emily, a few people who might have been distant relatives or friends, and an old couple who signed the guest book as neighbors. Emily sat in the front row, sitting very straight, looking oddly blank throughout the short service. She didn't cry, didn't go up to the casket for a final goodbye, didn't talk to the other guests. After the brief ceremony, we took the casket to Evergreen Cemetery at the edge of town. The October sky was gray and looked like rain, though it never did. The burial was quick. The casket lowered into the ground, a few words said by the non-religious officiant Emily had asked for, and then it was done. The small group left, with Emily being the last to go, staring at the hole in the ground with a look I couldn't understand. As I drove back to the funeral home, I tried to forget about the whole thing. We'd done our job. The camera would record until its battery died, and then it would just be another thing buried in the ground, eventually breaking down like everything else. But I still felt weird about it. Somewhere in Evergreen Cemetery, 6 feet underground, a camera was recording a teenage boy's body as it started to decompose. I couldn't stop thinking about it for the rest of my day, into the evening, and it was still on my mind as I locked up the funeral home and went home. I told myself it was just another strange request in a business that got plenty of them. But something about Emily Parker's blank behavior, the cold way she talked about her son's death, and that camera pointing at a dead boy's face, it all felt wrong in a way I couldn't quite explain. As I pulled into the driveway of my small apartment, I tried to push the thoughts away. The funeral was over. The burial was finished. My part in this weird request was done, or so I thought. 2 days after we buried Michael Parker, I was closing up the funeral home for the night. Robert and Sarah had left early. They had dinner plans with old friends, leaving me to handle the final walkthrough. I'd just finished checking the preparation room when I heard frantic pounding at the front door that made me jump. I walked through the dim hallway, past the consultation rooms where we met with grieving families, and into the front parlor. Through the decorative glass panels of the door, I saw a woman's outline, her fist still hitting against the wood. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize Emily Parker. The composed, distant woman from the funeral was gone. Her blonde hair was messy and hanging around her face. Her eyes were wide and bloodshot, looking around nervously. She wore the same black coat as before, but it was buttoned wrong, making her look messy. "I need the camera," she said, pushing past me into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. "We have to get it now." I closed the door, trying to process the change in her. "Mrs. Parker, the camera is buried with your son. We can't just—" "I know where it is." Her voice cracked as she spun to face me. "I've arranged everything. We need to go to the cemetery right now." I took a step back, maintaining some distance between us. "That's not how this works. Exhuming a body requires proper permits, family authorization, and I have the permits." She thrust a folder at me, papers spilling onto the floor. She dropped to her knees, gathering them with shaking hands. "County officials signed off this morning. It's all here." I helped her collect the scattered documents, looking at them as I did. They looked official at first, letterhead from the county clerk's office, signatures at the bottom. But something felt off. The formatting didn't match other permits I'd seen, and one signature was for a county official whose name I didn't know. "Mrs. Parker," I said carefully, "even with permits, we can't do this tonight. We need to schedule with the cemetery, arrange for proper equipment." "It's all taken care of," she interrupted, her voice rising. "I have someone waiting at Evergreen right now with a backhoe. We just need to go." I stood there holding the papers, trying to figure out what to do. This wasn't normal procedure at all, and her behavior made me really worried. I needed to call Robert. "Give me a minute," I said, stepping into the office and closing the door. Robert answered on the third ring. I kept my voice low as I explained the situation. "She seems unstable, Robert. The permits look questionable, and she's got someone waiting at the cemetery already." Robert was quiet for a moment before responding. "Is she threatening in any way?" "No, just desperate." "Look, James, if she's arranged for cemetery access and has what appear to be permits, we might want to cooperate for now. Keep things calm. I'll call Detective Martinez to meet you there. He's handled unusual situations for us before." "You think I should go with her?" I asked, surprised. "I think it might be safer than refusing her. She's clearly not in a rational state. Stay with her, don't let her damage anything, and wait for Martinez. I'll be there as soon as I can." I hung up and returned to the foyer where Emily was pacing, muttering something under her breath that I couldn't make out. "All right, Mrs. Parker. I'll go with you to retrieve the camera." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you. We need to hurry." The drive to Evergreen Cemetery was tense. I followed Emily's car, a gray sedan with New Hampshire plates, while trying to reach Detective Martinez on my cell phone. He didn't answer, so I left a message explaining where I was headed and why. The cemetery gates should have been locked at this hour, but they were open when we got there. The October evening was already dark, with just a tiny moon giving off hardly any light. Emily's headlights showed a yellow backhoe parked near Michael's grave, with its operator leaning against the machine smoking a cigarette. The man nodded at Emily as we walked up. He was middle-aged with a rough face, wearing work clothes and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. "This is the one?" he asked, gesturing toward Michael's grave with his cigarette. Emily nodded. "Yes. We need to open it immediately." The man shrugged, dropping his cigarette and crushing it under his boot. "Ladies paying triple my usual rate," he said to me, like that explained everything. I watched in disbelief as he climbed into the backhoe and started the engine. The machine's headlights lit up the gravestones as he positioned it beside Michael's plot. "This isn't right," I said to Emily, raising my voice over the engine noise. "We should wait for proper authorization." She didn't seem to hear me. She was too busy watching the backhoe as it started digging. The operator worked really fast, taking out the fresh dirt from on top of the casket. In about 20 minutes, he had uncovered the top of the shiny wood. "That's enough," Emily called out. The backhoe operator cut the engine, leaving us in relative quiet, broken only by the distant sound of traffic beyond the cemetery walls, The man jumped down from his machine and grabbed a shovel from the side of the backhoe. He cleared the remaining dirt from the casket lid, then looked at me. "You're the funeral guy, right? You want to open it?" I hesitated, looking at Emily. Her eyes were fixed on the casket, her body tense with anticipation. "Mrs. Parker, are you sure about this?" I asked one last time. "Open it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. With a sigh, I climbed down into the shallow pit. The casket was the mid-range model Emily had picked, solid wood with brass fixtures. I found the latches and opened them, then took a deep breath before lifting the lid. The smell hit me first. That unmistakable odor of early decomposition that embalming fluid couldn't completely cover up. I turned my face away, trying to breathe through my mouth. When I looked back, I kept my eyes away from Michael's face, focusing instead on finding the camera. It was still stuck to the inside of the lid where I'd put it, the small red recording light now dark. I carefully pulled off the double-sided tape and took out the device. "I've got it," I said, climbing out of the pit with the camera in hand. Emily grabbed it from me as soon as I was back on solid ground. She turned it over, found the small screen on the back, and pressed a button. The screen lit up with a blue glow on her face as she started looking at the footage. I watched her face change as she looked at the small screen. The excitement in her eyes disappeared, turning into confusion, then disbelief, and finally anger. Her hands started shaking. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No, no, no!" She shoved the camera at me. "Look at this. What did you do to it?" Reluctantly, I took the camera and looked at the screen. It showed exactly what I expected. Michael's body lying motionless in the casket, the image grainy in the low light. As I watched, nothing changed except the slow, natural process of decomposition. "I didn't do anything," I said, handing the camera back. "What were you expecting to see?" Her face contorted with fury. "You tampered with it. You did something to prevent him from coming back." "Coming back?" I repeated, not understanding. "He was supposed to wake up," she screamed, her voice echoing across the cemetery. "The signal was sent. He should have responded." The backhoe operator stepped back, looking uncomfortable. "Lady, I did what you paid me for. I'm going to fill this back in and get out of here." Emily ignored him, focusing completely on me. "You ruined everything. You must have messed with the transmission somehow." I raised my hands, trying to calm her down. "Mrs. Parker, Emily, I think you need help. Let me call someone for you." "Don't patronize me," she spat. "You have no idea what you've done." She spun around and stomped to her car, camera in hand. I yelled after her, but she kept going. Her car started with a roar, and she drove off fast, gravel flying everywhere. I just stood there in the cemetery, watching her car vanish through the gates. The backhoe guy had already begun filling in the grave, dirt pouring over the open casket. "You gonna help close that up?" he asked, nodding toward the casket. I climbed back down to close and latched the lid without thinking too much. I tried not to think about the body inside or what Emily had said. What did she mean about Michael coming back? What signal was she talking about? As the operator kept filling in the grave, I called Robert again. "She's gone," I told him when he answered. "She took the camera and left. She was not well, Robert. She kept saying Michael was supposed to wake up, that I'd prevented him from coming back." "Where are you now?" Robert asked, concern evident in his voice. "Still at the cemetery. There's a guy refilling the grave." "Stay there, I'm 10 minutes away." I hung up and watched as the backhoe completed its work, restoring Michael's grave to something close to its original state. The operator smoothed the dirt with his shovel, then turned to me. "That's the weirdest job I've ever done," he said, shaking his head. "Lady paid me in cash this morning, said it was some kind of scientific study, didn't ask questions." "Did she tell you her name?" I asked. "Emily something. Didn't catch the last name." He packed up his tools and climbed back into the backhoe. "Good luck with whatever this is, man. I'm out." I watched him drive away, leaving me alone in the cemetery with a freshly dug-up grave and more questions than answers. In the distance, I saw headlights coming. Robert, finally arriving. I walked toward the cemetery entrance to meet him, still thinking about Emily's face as she screamed about Michael waking up. Something was very wrong here, and I had a feeling we'd only scratched the surface. I woke up to the sound of my phone ringing. The blue glow of my alarm clock showed 2:17 a.m. My phone buzzed across the nightstand, an unknown number lighting up the screen. I let it ring, thinking it was a wrong number or some automated scam call. When it stopped, I rolled over and pulled the covers back up. Less than a minute later, it started again. Same unknown number. I silenced it and put the phone face down. The third time it rang, I checked to make sure it wasn't Robert or Sarah calling from an unfamiliar phone with some funeral home emergency. Still the same unknown number. I declined the call. By the fourth ring, I was fully awake and annoyed. The fifth time, I finally answered. "Hello," I said, my voice rough with sleep. No response, just breathing on the other end, slow and labored like someone was struggling for air. "Who is this?" I asked. The breathing got a bit louder. I hung up and blocked the number, then spent another hour awake trying to convince myself it was just a prank call. The next night, it happened again. 2:17 a.m. exactly. A different unknown number, but the same pattern. Repeated calls until I answered. Then nothing but that creepy breathing. I hung up faster this time and blocked that number too. The third night, I was already awake when the phone rang, looking at the ceiling and waiting for it. 2:17 a.m., right on schedule. I answered right away. "What do you want?" I demanded. The breathing on the other end sounded different this time, more like a machine, with a weird sound that made my arms get goosebumps. It reminded me of something I couldn't quite remember, a sound I'd heard not long ago. Then it hit me. It sounded like when bodies start to decay, air pushing through lungs filled with fluid. The kind of sound I'd sometimes hear when moving bodies in the prep room. I hung up, my hand shaking. On the fourth night, I didn't get a call. Instead, my phone got a text message at exactly 2:17 a.m. An unknown number had sent a video file with nothing written. I should have deleted it. I knew that even as my thumb stayed over the play button. But after 3 nights of those calls, I needed answers. The video started playing, and I knew it right away. The same grainy footage I'd seen on Emily's camera at the cemetery. Michael Parker's body was still in his casket, the image dark. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. I was about to stop the video when Michael's eyes suddenly opened. I almost dropped my phone. His eyes were wide and didn't blink, catching what little light was in the casket. His lips didn't move at all, but a voice came out, distorted and mechanical, like it was coming through static. I couldn't understand the words. The voice talked for about 10 seconds before the video stopped. I played it again, turning the volume all the way up, but the words were still impossible to understand, just jumbled sounds that barely sounded like talking. I called Robert right away, not caring that it was almost 2:30 in the morning. "James?" he answered, his voice thick with sleep. "What's wrong?" "I got a video," I said, the words tumbling out. "From Emily, I think. It shows Michael in the casket and his eyes open, and there's a voice." "Slow down," Robert interrupted. "You're not making sense." I took a deep breath and explained about the calls I'd been receiving, and now the video. "It sounds like you're under a lot of stress," Robert said when I finished. "After what happened at the cemetery, that's understandable. But people don't send videos of corpses talking, James." "I know what I saw," I insisted. "The mind plays tricks when we're tired or stressed. Get some sleep, and we'll talk tomorrow." He hung up before I could argue anymore. I sat on my bed, still holding my phone. I couldn't get the image of Michael's open eyes out of my head. I knew I hadn't imagined it. The video was real. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I drove straight to Robert's house instead of the funeral home. It was barely 7 a.m. when I knocked on his door. Sarah answered, already dressed for the day in a navy blue pantsuit. "James?" she said, surprise evident in her voice. "Is everything all right?" "I need to show Robert something," I said, holding up my phone. "It's important." She let me in, calling for Robert as she led me to their kitchen. He appeared a moment later, coffee mug in hand, looking much more put together than I felt. "You look terrible," he said by way of greeting. "I need you to watch this," I said, pulling up the video and holding out my phone. Robert sighed but took the phone. Sarah moved next to him, and they both watched the screen with professional faces, until Michael's eyes opened. Robert stopped mid-sip of his coffee. Sarah put her hand over her mouth. When the weird voice started, Robert turned up the volume and focused hard on listening. When the video ended, he played it again, then a third time. "That's not possible," he finally said, handing the phone back to me. "But you saw it," I pressed. "You heard it." "I saw something," he admitted. "But there has to be an explanation. Video manipulation, maybe." "Why would anyone do that?" I asked. "And what about the calls, the breathing?" Sarah had been quiet, but now she moved to a small desk in the corner of the kitchen and pulled out a folder. "There's something else," she said, her voice steady despite the concern in her eyes. "I was processing Michael's paperwork yesterday and decided to look up his obituary online. I found this." She handed me a printout of an online news article dated 2 weeks earlier. The headline read, "3 dead in tragic bridge accident." I scanned the text quickly. William and Jennifer Parker, along with their 17-year-old son Michael, died when their vehicle plunged off the Piscataqua River Bridge late Tuesday night. The family was returning to their Portsmouth, New Hampshire home after visiting relatives in Maine. I looked up at Sarah. Emily told me she was Michael's mother. "Exactly," Sarah said. "Jennifer Parker was Michael's mother. The woman who came to us was an imposter." Robert took the article from my hands, reading it himself. "This changes things," he said, his skepticism fading. "If she lied about being his mother, then she probably lied about everything else," I finished. "The permits for the exhumation, her reasons for wanting the camera in the casket." "We need to call the police," Sarah said. Robert nodded. "I'll call Detective Martinez. He worked on that jewelry theft last year." While Robert was on the phone, I showed Sarah the text messages I'd gotten with the video. She wrote down the phone numbers, though I didn't think they'd help much, probably burner phones. Robert came back looking annoyed. "Martinez says they can't do much without knowing Emily's real name or where she is now. The exhumation wasn't exactly legal, but since the cemetery worker said she had what looked like permits, it's more of a paperwork problem than a crime." "What about the video?" I asked. He said to bring it in, but he didn't sound optimistic. Video evidence is easy to manipulate these days. I ran my hand through my hair, trying to think. "So we're on our own with this?" "Not entirely," Robert said. "Martinez agreed to run the fingerprints from the consultation room where Emily first met with you. If she's in the system, we might get a real name." My phone buzzed with another text message, the same unknown number that had sent the video. This time, it contained what looked like GPS coordinates, followed by a simple message. "He's awake." I showed it to Robert and Sarah. "Those coordinates," Robert said, pulling out his phone and entering them into a mapping app. "They're pointing to Evergreen Cemetery." The three of us looked at each other, the implications hanging in the air between us. "We can't just ignore this," I said finally. "We also can't go rushing off to the cemetery based on a text from someone who's been harassing you," Robert countered. "This could be exactly what she wants." "Who is she, exactly?" Sarah asked. "And what does she want with Michael Parker's body?" I thought about Emily's, or whatever her real name was, reaction at the cemetery when she viewed the camera footage. Her rage when she claimed Michael was supposed to wake up. "I think she was expecting something to happen to Michael's body," I said slowly. "Something the camera was meant to record. When it didn't happen, She blamed me for interfering somehow. And now she's sending you videos suggesting it did happen after all, Robert said, following my train of thought. Which means either the video is fake, Sarah added, or something happened to that body after we reburied it. My phone chimed again. Another text from the same number. Time is running out. Robert looked at the message, then at his watch. It's still daylight. If we're going to check this out, now would be safer than after dark. I was surprised by his willingness to investigate. You want to go to the cemetery? I want to know what's going on, he said firmly. If someone is disturbing a body from my funeral home, I need to see for myself. Sarah looked concerned. Should I come with you? Robert shook his head. Stay here and keep trying Martinez. Tell him where we're going and why. If he won't send someone officially, maybe he'll at least drive by to check on us. As we walked to Robert's car, I couldn't stop thinking about the video. Michael's eyes suddenly opening, staring blankly at the camera. The creepy voice that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. What do you think we'll find? I asked Robert as we pulled out of his driveway. He held the steering wheel tight, his knuckles white. I don't know, but I'm bringing this. He nodded toward the back seat where I saw a tire iron partly hidden under a blanket. You think we'll need that? I think someone is playing a very elaborate, very disturbing game, he replied, and I don't intend to be unprepared. As we drove toward Evergreen Cemetery, the sun started to go down. We had maybe 2 hours of daylight left. I checked my phone again, reading the last message one more time. Time is running out. For what? I wondered. And for whom? Robert's car headlights cut through the growing darkness as we pulled into Evergreen Cemetery. The sun had nearly set, painting the sky in deep purples and blues that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. My stomach tightened as we drove past the iron gates that should have been locked at this hour. They're open again, I said, pointing. Robert nodded grimly. Just like when you came with Emily, or whatever her name is. We parked near the cemetery office, a small brick building that was dark and empty. Robert reached into the back seat and grabbed the tire iron, then handed me one of the 2 big flashlights he'd brought. Let's check those coordinates, he said. I pulled out my phone and opened the mapping app. The little blue dot showing where we were blinked on the screen, still some distance from the red pin marking our destination. I got my bearings, looking across the rows of headstones. This way, I said, pointing toward the eastern section of the cemetery where Michael Parker had been buried less than a week ago. We walked in silence, our flashlight beams bouncing across granite markers and marble angels. The temperature had dropped with the sun, and my breath formed small clouds in the air. Every few steps, I looked back over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling we were being watched. You really think we'll find something? I asked, keeping my voice low even though we were alone. Robert kept his eyes forward. I think someone went to a lot of trouble to get us out here. As we got closer to Michael's plot, my flashlight showed something that made me stop suddenly. The grave looked wrong. The dirt was piled up differently than it had been after the backhoe driver filled it back in. Robert, I said, my voice catching. He had already seen it. We moved closer, our lights showing what I was afraid of. The grave was messed with again. Fresh dirt was scattered around the edges, and a big hole sat in the middle of the plot. Jesus, Robert whispered. We approached cautiously. The hole was about the size and shape of the casket, which was now partly visible. Someone had dug down just enough to show the lid, which stood open like a weird jack-in-the-box. Robert crouched at the edge of the hole, shining his light inside. I forced myself to look. The casket was empty. Where is he? I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Robert stood up, looking around with his flashlight. There, he said suddenly, pointing to the ground several feet away from the grave. I followed his light and saw them, drag marks in the soft earth, leading away from the open casket toward the older section of the cemetery. Should we call the police? I asked. Robert hesitated, then shook his head. Let's see where this goes first. We need to know what we're dealing with. We followed the trail, moving deeper into the cemetery. The drag marks were clear. Someone had pulled Michael's body across the ground, not trying to hide what they did. The trail took us past old graves with worn headstones, toward a large stone mausoleum that looked like a small Greek temple against the dark sky. My flashlight caught something pale against the dark stone of the mausoleum wall. At first, I thought it was a statue, a figure standing completely still. Then I recognized the dark suit. "Robert," I said, grabbing his arm. "Look." We both pointed our flashlights at the figure. It was Michael Parker's body, propped up against the mausoleum wall in a standing position. His eyes were open, reflecting our flashlight beams like a cat's eyes caught in headlights. "That's not possible," Robert said, his professional composure finally cracking. "He's been dead for over a week. Decomposition would have..." He didn't finish the thought. We both knew what he meant. After 5 days in the ground, Michael's body should have been rotting. The body should have been limp, unable to stand even when propped against a wall. Yet there he was, standing upright in a way that went against everything I knew about death. We walked slowly toward him, Robert holding the tire iron tightly. When we were about 10 feet away, a sound came from the body, the same mechanical, distorted voice I'd heard in the video. "Not her son, not her son, not her son." The voice repeated the phrase 3 times, even though Michael's lips didn't move. The sound seemed to come from inside his chest or throat. Robert stopped walking. "What the hell?" I couldn't move or speak. The voice was exactly what I'd heard in the video, but hearing it in person, coming from a days-old corpse, was completely different. "Not her son," the voice said once more, louder this time. Then the body slumped forward, collapsing face first onto the ground with a dull thud. We stood frozen for several seconds before Robert rushed forward. I followed, my training finally kicking in. Robert knelt beside the body, careful not to touch it. "He's back to normal," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I mean, he's as he should be, showing proper signs of decomposition." I pulled out my phone with shaky hands. "I'm calling 911. The dispatcher answered right away, and I tried to explain what was happening as calmly as I could. I gave our location and told them about finding a dug-up body, but didn't mention anything about standing corpses or weird voices. The dispatcher said officers would be there soon. While we waited, Robert and I did our best to keep the area secure, making sure nothing else got messed up. We didn't talk about what we'd just seen. It felt like we both needed time to think about it before talking about it. Police sirens got louder as they got closer to the cemetery. 2 patrol cars parked near our car, their lights flashing blue and red on the gravestones. 4 officers stepped out, followed by a detective in regular clothes who I knew right away, David Martinez, the same detective Robert had mentioned earlier. Martinez walked up to us with a blank face. "Mr. Thompson," he said, nodding to Robert, then to me. "Mr. Wilson, I'm guessing?" I nodded. "Want to tell me what you're doing in a cemetery after hours?" Robert explained about the text messages I'd received and our discovery of the empty grave. Martinez listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. "And the body?" he asked when Robert finished. "Over here," I said, leading them to where Michael lay crumpled on the ground. The officers secured the scene with yellow tape while Martinez examined the body without touching it. "You said in your call that the body was moved from the grave to this location," Martinez said, looking up at me. "Any idea who might have done this?" I hesitated, looking at Robert. He gave a slight nod. "We think it might be connected to a woman who called herself Emily Parker," I said. "She claimed to be Michael's mother and arranged his funeral at our home. But we've since learned that Michael's real mother died in the same accident he did." Martinez's eyebrows rose slightly. So you're saying the woman who arranged the funeral was an imposter? Yes, Robert confirmed. She also arranged an illegal exhumation 2 days ago to retrieve a camera she'd placed in the casket. Martinez stood up, brushing dirt from his knees. A camera? I explained about the camera and the video I'd received showing Michael's eyes opening. And did you see anything unusual when you found the body here tonight? Martinez asked, his tone carefully professional. Again, I looked at Robert. This time he spoke. The body was propped up against the wall in a standing position, he said. Given the state of decomposition, that shouldn't have been physically possible. Martinez waited, clearly sensing there was more. We also heard a voice, I added, coming from the body, though his lips weren't moving. It said, "Not her son," several times before the body collapsed. Martinez's expression didn't change, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. A voice, he repeated, from a decomposing body. I know how it sounds, Robert said firmly, but we both heard it. Martinez made another note in his book. We'll need formal statements from both of you, and I'd like to see that video you mentioned, Mr. Wilson. The medical examiner arrived shortly after, and we watched as they photographed, examined, and finally took Michael's body away. Martinez told us to follow him to the station in our own car. The police station was quiet at that hour. Martinez put us in separate interview rooms, saying it was standard procedure. I spent the next 2 hours telling everything that had happened since Emily Parker first walked into the funeral home. The detective asked lots of questions about the camera, the exhumation, and the video I'd received. He seemed really interested in Emily's behavior and anything she might have said about why she wanted the camera in the casket. When I mentioned the phrase, "He was supposed to wake up," and her accusation that I had somehow messed with a transmission, Martinez leaned forward, his professional mask dropping for a moment. She specifically used those words, a transmission? I nodded. She thought I'd stopped whatever she was expecting to happen. Martinez wrote something down, then kept asking questions. We finally finished after midnight. He took me back to the waiting area where Robert was sitting, looking tired but calm. You're both free to go, Martinez said. But I need to ask you not to leave town for the next few days. We'll have more questions as the investigation progresses. What about Michael's body? Robert asked. And the family? We're attempting to contact his actual next of kin, Martinez replied. As for the body, it will remain in the medical examiner's custody until we determine exactly what happened here. As we walked to Robert's car, he put a hand on my shoulder. You okay? I wasn't sure how to answer that. I just watched a dead body stand upright and speak. Not really, I admitted. Me neither, he said. But we'll figure this out. Robert dropped me off at my apartment building. As I got out of the car, he rolled down his window. Lock your doors tonight, he said, and call me if anything at all, seems off. I nodded, watching as he drove away. My apartment felt cold and empty as I walked in, locked the door behind me and slid the chain into place. I checked the windows to make sure they were all locked, then sat on the edge of my bed, still wearing my jacket. My phone chimed with a text message, unknown number. You shouldn't have interfered. I stared at the message for a long moment, then did the only thing that made sense. I called my brother. Thomas answered on the 4th ring, his voice thick with sleep. James, it's 1 a.m. I need you to come stay with me for a few days, I said without preamble. There must have been something in my voice that conveyed the urgency, because he didn't argue or ask questions. I'll leave first thing tomorrow, he said. You want to tell me what's going on? When you get here, I promised. It's complicated. After we hung up, I took a quick shower, trying to wash away the cemetery dirt and the memory of Michael's reflecting eyes. I double-checked all the locks again before finally crawling into bed, exhausted but sure I wouldn't sleep. I was wrong. I passed out almost immediately into a deep sleep with no dreams. I woke up suddenly, not knowing what woke me. My nightstand clock showed 3:42 a.m. something felt off. I stayed completely still and listened. My apartment was quiet, but the air felt different, like someone had just been there. I slowly sat up and reached for my bedside lamp. When I turned on the light, I saw what had bothered me. My bedroom door was open, even though I remembered closing it before bed. I got up carefully and looked into the hallway. The bathroom door was open too. So was my small home office door. And the living room door. Every single door in my apartment was open, though I had closed them all and had locked and chained the front door before going to bed. I checked the front door. The chain was still attached, the deadbolt still locked. All the windows were locked too. Nobody could have gotten in, yet someone or something had opened all my interior doors while I slept. I stood in the middle of my living room, suddenly very aware of how alone I was and how long it would be until morning. Thomas arrived at my apartment just after 9 the next morning, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and worry etched across his face. I hadn't seen my brother in nearly 3 months, but he looked exactly the same. Tall, athletic build, dark hair cut shorter than mine, and green eyes that missed nothing. "You look like hell," he said as I let him in. "Good to see you too," I replied, locking the door behind him. He dropped his bag by the couch and turned to face me. "So, what's going on? You sounded pretty freaked out last night." I took a deep breath. "You might want to sit down for this." I spent the next hour telling him everything. Emily Parker's arrival at the funeral home, the camera in Michael's casket, the illegal exhumation, the video I'd received showing Michael's eyes opening, and finally, what Robert and I had witnessed at the cemetery. Thomas listened without interrupting, his face changing from doubt to worry as my story went on. When I finished, he ran a hand through his hair. "Jesus, James." "I know how it sounds," I said. "Actually, I was going to say it sounds like you're in serious trouble." He leaned forward. "Show me the video." I pulled out my phone and found the video file. Thomas watched it closely, his face blank. When it ended, he played it again, turning up the volume to hear the distorted voice better. "And you're sure this isn't edited?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But what Robert and I saw at the cemetery wasn't edited. That happened." Thomas handed the phone back to me. "Okay, let's say I believe you. What's our next move?" I was surprised by his quick acceptance. "You believe me, just like that?" He shrugged. "You're my brother. You don't make stuff up and you don't get scared easily. If you say a dead kid stood up and talked, then that's what happened." He paused. "Besides, someone broke into your apartment and opened all your doors while you were sleeping. That part's definitely real and definitely creepy." I felt so relieved. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to simply believe me. "I think we need to find out more about the Parkers," I said. "And about this woman who called herself Emily." Thomas nodded. "Let's start with the accident. You said they died when their car went off a bridge?" I opened my laptop and searched for news reports about the Parker family. Several articles appeared, all dated about 2 weeks earlier. The most detailed was from the Portsmouth Herald. "Portsmouth family killed in tragic bridge accident. William Parker, 45, Jennifer Parker, 42, and their son Michael, 17, died Tuesday night when their car went off the Piscataqua River Bridge. Witnesses saw the car swerve suddenly before breaking through the guardrail and falling into the river. Rescue teams found the bodies several hours later. William Parker worked as a computer systems analyst at Portsmouth Regional Hospital, while Jennifer was a high school guidance counselor. Michael was a senior at Portsmouth High School. Family members said the Parkers were a close-knit family who had lived in the area for over 10 years. Thomas read over my shoulder. "So they were real people, and they all died together. Which means the woman who came to the funeral home definitely wasn't Michael's mother," I said. "What about the funeral arrangements?" Thomas asked. "If they all died, who was handling that?" I searched for obituaries and found one listing services for all 3 Parkers scheduled at Coastal Funeral Home in Portsmouth, but according to the dates, those services never happened. "That's weird," I said, pointing to the screen. Their funeral was supposed to be at a different place entirely. Thomas looked unhappy. So how did Michael end up at Thompson's? I thought back to the paperwork Sarah had processed. The transfer documents seemed real. Someone claiming to be from his family must have sent the body somewhere else. The fake Emily, Thomas concluded. But why? Why go through all that trouble for a stranger's body? Thomas stood up and paced the small living room. Let's think about this logically. This woman, whoever she is, wanted Michael's body specifically. She created a fake identity, intercepted the body before the planned funeral, and had it sent to your funeral home instead. Then she insisted on putting a camera in the casket. And she expected something to happen, I added. When we dug up the casket and she saw the footage, she was furious that Michael hadn't woken up, as she put it. But then he did, Thomas said. At least, according to that video and what you saw at the cemetery. I nodded slowly. She did something to him. Something that made his eyes open and produce that voice. We need more information, Thomas decided. About Michael, about the accident, and about this woman. We spent the next few hours researching online. Thomas found that Michael had attended Portsmouth High School, where his mother had worked as a counselor. The school's website had a memorial page for the Parker family, including a photo of Michael. A tall, skinny teenager with messy dark hair and a serious look. He looks exactly like I remember from the funeral home, I confirmed. Thomas discovered that Michael had been active on several online forums dedicated to paranormal investigation. His username, Michael Beyond the Veil, appeared in discussions about electronic voice phenomena and attempts to communicate with the dead through technology. Listen to this, Thomas said, reading from one of Michael's posts. I've been experimenting with modified radio frequencies to capture EVPs. The theory is that spirits can manipulate electronic signals to communicate. My latest setup uses a custom amplifier that boosts signals in the 75-85 Hz range, which seems to produce the clearest results. He was into ghost hunting? I asked. Looks like it was more than a hobby, Thomas replied, scrolling through more posts. He was pretty technical about it. Lots of discussions about circuit designs and signal processing. Something clicked in my mind. The woman, Emily, she accused me of interfering with a transmission when the camera didn't show what she expected. Thomas looked up from the screen. You think this is connected to Michael's paranormal research? I don't know, but it's a strange coincidence. We decided our next step was to visit Portsmouth Regional Hospital, where Michael had been pronounced dead after the accident. It was about an hour's drive from Portland. Thomas insisted on driving, saying I hadn't slept enough and might crash the car. The hospital was a big, modern building near the center of Portsmouth. We headed to the emergency department, where I went up to the reception desk and told them I was a distant relative of the Parkers looking for closure about the accident. The receptionist, an older woman with kind eyes, couldn't tell us much because of privacy rules. But when I mentioned we were trying to understand what happened, when after the accident she suggested we talk to one of the nurses who had worked that night. Nancy's been here forever, she said. If she was working, she might remember something. Let me see if she's available. A few minutes later, Nancy appeared, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She led us to a small break room where we could talk privately. I remember that night, she said after I explained why we were there. 3 fatalities from the same family. It's not something you forget easily. Were you there when they were brought in? Thomas asked. Nancy nodded. The parents died right there, but they tried to save the boy for almost an hour. He had the best chance since he was young and healthy, but his injuries were too bad. I showed her the photo of Michael from the school website. This is him, right? She looked at it and nodded. That's him. Poor kid. Was there anything unusual that happened afterward? I asked carefully. Anyone who seemed particularly interested in the case? Nancy's face changed a bit. There was one thing. A woman showed up saying she was a family friend. She really wanted to see the body, but she wasn't on the contact list, so we couldn't let her. Thomas and I looked at each other. Do you remember what she looked like? I asked. Blonde, I think. Average height. Very intense. When we refused to let her see the body, she got angry. Security had to escort her out. Would there be security footage of that? Thomas asked. Nancy shrugged. Possibly. The hospital keeps footage for about a month. You'd have to ask security. We thanked her for her time and went to the security office. The guard on duty didn't want to help at first, but when Thomas said we were working with Detective Martinez from the Portland Police Department on a case about the Parkers, he changed his mind. Let me see what we've got, he said, turning to his computer. After some searching, he found footage from the night of the accident. We watched as a woman with pale blonde hair and a tight ponytail argued with hospital staff near the entrance to the morgue. Even on the grainy security footage, I recognized her right away. That's her, I said. That's Emily. The guard fast-forwarded through more footage. She came back after hours, he said, showing us a clip time-stamped at 02:17 hours, the exact time I'd been getting the phone calls. The woman was trying to get in through a service entrance near the morgue, but a security guard stopped her. We get people trying to sneak in all the time, the guard explained. Usually it's drug seekers or homeless looking for a warm place to sleep. This one was different. Very determined. We left the hospital with copies of the security footage, which the guard provided after Thomas promised to have Detective Martinez follow up officially. So she tried to get to Michael's body at the hospital and couldn't, Thomas summarized as we drove back to Portland. Then she somehow intercepted the funeral arrangements and had him sent to Thompson's instead, where she could control access to the body, I added, and plant whatever device made those sounds we heard. Our next stop was Portsmouth High School. The administration office was closed for the weekend, but we found a teacher supervising weekend detention who had known Michael. Brilliant kid, the physics teacher told us, especially with electronics. He built his own radio equipment for the science fair last year, won first place. Was he interested in paranormal research? I asked. The teacher smiled slightly. He had some unusual theories about communication across different planes of existence, as he put it. Most of us thought it was just a phase, but he was serious about it. He even formed a club, the Paranormal Investigation Society. Only had a few members, but they were really into it. We learned that Michael had been particularly interested in theories about electronic communication with the dead. His science fair project, which was officially about radio wave propagation, had included a section on frequencies that supposedly helped paranormal communication. By late afternoon, we were heading back to Portland with a better picture of Michael Parker, a technically skilled teenager who was really into using technology to communicate with the dead. But we still had no idea who Emily really was, or why she had targeted Michael specifically. As we got close to my apartment building, Thomas suddenly got tense. "Something's wrong," he said, pointing to my window on the 3rd floor. The curtain was moving slightly, though I was sure I'd closed the window before we left. We parked across the street and watched the building for several minutes. Nothing looked out of place, but I felt just as nervous as Thomas did. "Call Martinez," Thomas suggested. "Let him know what's happening." I called the detective, who said he'd send a patrol car, but it might take 20 minutes to arrive. Thomas wasn't willing to wait. "Someone could be destroying evidence right now," he said. "I'm going in." I couldn't let him go alone. We entered the building carefully, taking the stairs instead of the elevator to stay quieter. When we got to my floor, the hallway was empty and quiet. My apartment door didn't look like anyone had broken in, but when I tried my key, the door was already unlocked. Thomas stood to one side of the doorway, telling me to stay back. He pushed the door open slowly and looked inside. "Clear," he whispered after a moment. We entered the apartment, which had been thoroughly ransacked. Drawers were pulled out, furniture overturned, books scattered across the floor. But the destruction wasn't random. It was a methodical search. "My laptop," I said, rushing to the desk where I'd left it. "It's gone." The laptop contained copies of the video showing Michael's eyes opening, as well as all the research we'd done that morning. Nothing else was missing. Not my watch on the nightstand, not the cash in my dresser drawer. Thomas checked the rest of the apartment, confirming no one was still inside. "They knew exactly what they wanted," he said. We were still looking at the mess when Detective Martinez arrived, looking tired but alert. He checked out the scene carefully. "You're having quite a week, Mr. Wilson," he said, pulling out his notebook. I explained what had happened, including our research into the Parker family and our trip to Portsmouth. Martinez listened carefully, occasionally making notes. "I have something to tell you as well," he said when I finished. "The medical examiner completed the autopsy on Michael Parker this morning." Thomas and I waited expectantly. "They found something unusual," Martinez continued. "A small electronic device implanted at the base of the skull, near the brainstem. It was professionally inserted, with minimal external scarring, the kind of work you'd expect from a neurosurgeon." My skin went cold. "What kind of device?" "That's the interesting part. It appears to be custom-made, but it contains components typically used in hearing aids and small speakers. There was also a receiver that could pick up remote signals." "Like a transmission," I said, remembering Emily's words at the cemetery. Martinez nodded. "Exactly. The ME believes the device could produce sounds that would seem to come from the body itself." "That explains the voice," Thomas said. "But what about the eyes opening? Or the body standing upright days after death?" Martinez shook his head. "That's still unexplained. The device shouldn't have been able to cause muscle movement, especially not after decomposition had started." I thought about what we'd learned. Michael's interest in talking to the dead through technology, the woman's determination to get to his body, the implanted device. "She was using him," I said slowly, "using his body for some kind of experiment." "But who is she?" Thomas asked. "And why Michael specifically?" Martinez closed his notebook. "We're running her fingerprints through every database we can access. If she has any kind of record or professional license, we'll find her." As Martinez got ready to go, he turned back to us. "I'd advise both of you to stay somewhere else tonight. Whoever broke in might come back." "We will," Thomas assured him. After Martinez left, we packed some essentials and headed to a hotel near the outskirts of Portland. Thomas insisted on a room with 2 beds on the 2nd floor, with easy access to the stairs and a clear view of the parking lot. "You really think she'll come after us?" I asked as we settled in. Thomas checked that the window was locked before drawing the curtains. "Someone broke into your apartment and stole only the laptop with evidence about this case. Yeah, I think we need to be careful." I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. What is she trying to do? What was the point of all this? "I don't know," Thomas admitted, "but we're going to find out." As I nearly fell asleep, tired from everything that happened last week, I couldn't stop thinking about Michael Parker standing against that mausoleum wall, his eyes shining in our flashlight beams, the robot-like voice saying over and over, "Not her son. Not her son." Whatever this woman was trying to do, she had used a dead boy to make it happen, and now she knew we were looking into her. I woke up to Thomas shaking my shoulder. The hotel room was filled with gray morning light, and my brother's face looked grim. "Martinez called," he said. "He wants to meet us at the station in an hour." I sat up, rubbing my eyes. I'd slept better than expected, probably from sheer exhaustion. "Did he say why?" "Just that he has new information." Thomas was already dressed, his hair damp from a shower. "Coffee's on the desk. I got it from the lobby." I took a quick shower, letting the hot water clear my head. As I dressed, I tried to organize my thoughts about everything we'd learned so far. Michael Parker, a teenager interested in paranormal communication, a woman posing as his mother who planted a device in his body, a corpse that somehow stood upright and spoke days after death. None of it made sense, yet all of it had happened. We got to the Portland Police Department 20 minutes later. The desk sergeant sent us to a small conference room where Martinez waited with a stack of folders and a laptop. "Thanks for coming," he said, gesturing for us to sit. He looked like he hadn't slept much either, with dark circles under his eyes and a day's worth of stubble on his face. "What did you find?" I asked. Martinez opened one of the folders. "We've been comparing notes with Portsmouth PD and the state police. I think we're starting to get a clearer picture." He spread several documents across the table. First, the device found in Michael Parker's body. The ME sent it to the FBI lab for analysis. It's high-tech, custom-built with parts that could receive outside signals and make sound. "Like a speaker?" Thomas asked. "More or less. But it was positioned to create vibrations that would resonate through the vocal cords and oral cavity. In simple terms, it could make it sound like the body was speaking." I thought back to the cemetery, to Michael's lips not moving while that weird voice came from somewhere in his chest or throat. "That matches what we heard." Martinez nodded. "But here's where it gets strange. The device shouldn't have been able to cause muscle movement. There was no mechanism for that. So we still can't explain how the body's eyes opened or how it stayed sitting up." "Could there have been a second device?" Thomas suggested. The ME did a thorough examination. There was nothing else implanted in the body. I leaned forward. "What about the woman? Have you identified her?" Martinez slid another folder toward us. "We got lucky. She left fingerprints all over your apartment during the break-in. They match prints found on a coffee cup in the consultation room at Thompson's." He opened the folder to show a photograph of a woman with pale blonde hair and sharp features. It was definitely Emily Parker, though she looked more professional in this picture, wearing a lab coat and standing in what looked like a research facility. "Her name is Olivia Wright," Martinez said, "former neuroscience researcher at Boston University. She was dismissed 3 years ago for ethical violations involving experimental brain-computer interfaces." "Brain-computer interfaces?" I repeated. "Technology that allows direct communication between the brain and external devices. According to BU's records, Dr. Wright was developing methods to record and stimulate neural activity in patients with severe brain injuries. She was fired after it was discovered she was conducting unauthorized experiments outside approved protocols." Thomas picked up the photo, studying it. "And she has no connection to the Parker family?" "None that we can find. She appears to have selected Michael at random, or perhaps because of his interest in paranormal communication. We found his online posts about using technology to contact the dead." I thought about what we'd learned at Portsmouth High School. His science fair project was about radio wave propagation, but it included theories about communicating with the deceased. Martinez nodded. Wright may have seen him as an ideal subject, someone whose own interests aligned with her experiments. "But why go through all the trouble of creating a false identity and arranging a funeral?" Thomas asked. "Why not just, I don't know, steal the body and experiment on it directly?" She needed a legitimate way to monitor the results, I realized. The camera in the casket. It was recording data for her experiment. "Exactly," Martinez confirmed. "And she needed someone to handle the body who wouldn't ask too many questions. A regular funeral with a closed casket provided the perfect cover." I felt sick thinking about how I'd unknowingly participated in her scheme. "So what now? Have you arrested her?" "We obtained a warrant yesterday evening. Portsmouth PD raided her last known address early this morning." Martinez's expression tightened. "She wasn't there, but they found what can only be described as a makeshift laboratory. Equipment for creating electronic implants, surgical tools, technical diagrams of the human brainstem." "Jesus," Thomas muttered. "They also found research notes about post-mortem neural stimulation and bridging consciousness across the threshold of death. It appears Dr. Wright believes she can temporarily restore some brain function in deceased individuals." I remembered the text message. "He's awake." the mechanical voice from Michael's body, not her son. "She's delusional," Thomas said. Martinez shrugged. "Maybe, but she's also really smart and dangerous. We've told all local cops about her. We'll find her soon." As if on cue, my phone chimed with a text notification. Unknown number. I pulled out my phone and felt sick as I read the message. "Audio file attached. Listen alone." Martinez noticed my face. "What is it?" I showed him the text. "It's from her." "Can you open the file?" he asked, moving around the table to look over my shoulder. I tapped the attachment. A media player opened, showing a 10-second audio clip. I pressed play, and the room filled with the same messed-up, robot-like voice we'd heard at the cemetery. "She's coming for you next." The three of us sat in silence for a moment after the clip ended. "That's Michael's voice," I said finally. "The same one from the cemetery." Martinez took my phone. "I'm sending this to our tech team. They might be able to trace it." "Why is she targeting you?" Thomas asked me. I shook my head. "I don't know." But Martinez was looking at me thoughtfully. "Your background is in electrical engineering, right? Before you started at the funeral home?" "Yeah, but I don't see—" "It's in your employment records," Martinez continued. "Thompson mentioned it when I interviewed him. Said you had a technical mind that helped with the equipment at the funeral home." A cold feeling spread through my chest. "You think she chose me because of my background?" "It's possible. If her experiment involves electronic interfaces with the dead, someone with your training might be valuable to her." Thomas stood up abruptly. "We need protection. If this woman is targeting my brother—" "I agree," Martinez said. "We can arrange for an officer to—" "No," I interrupted. "If she's watching me, a police presence will just scare her off. We need to catch her." Martinez studied me for a moment. "What are you suggesting?" "Use me as bait. Let her think I'm vulnerable, then arrest her when she makes her move." Thomas started to protest, but I held up a hand. "She's already broken into my apartment once. She'll try again." After some discussion, we developed a plan. I would return to my apartment that evening, making it appear that I was alone. Thomas would stay out of sight in the spare bedroom, while plainclothes officers watched the building from outside. Martinez would coordinate from a surveillance van parked down the street. We spent the rest of the day preparing. Martinez arranged for a security team to check my apartment for any devices Olivia might have planted during the break-in. They found nothing, which was both reassuring and scary. It meant she hadn't left anything behind, but it also meant she'd been focused only on taking my laptop. Thomas and I stopped at a sporting goods store to buy a baseball bat, something he could use for protection that wouldn't require a permit. I caught him looking at hunting knives too, but he put them back when he saw me watching. "Just being thorough," he said. By early evening, we were back at my apartment. The police had set up hidden cameras watching my bedroom window and the front door. Martinez had given us both earpieces so he could talk to us from the van. "You sure about this?" Thomas asked as darkness fell. He was checking the baseball bat, testing its weight in his hands. "No," I admitted. "But I want this to be over." We ordered pizza for dinner, making sure anyone watching the building could see the delivery. After eating, Thomas went to the spare bedroom, leaving the door slightly open. I made it obvious I was getting ready for bed, moving around the apartment with the lights on so people could see through the windows. At 11, I turned off all the lights except my bedside lamp and got into bed with a book. The plan was to look normal while staying alert. "All quiet outside," Martinez's voice came through my earpiece. "2 officers on the ground floor, 1 on the roof. We've got all angles covered." I answered with a quiet "Roger," and kept pretending to read. The hours crawled by. Midnight came and went, then 1 o'clock. I was starting to think Olivia wouldn't show when Martinez's voice came through the earpiece again, tense and low. Movement on the fire escape, east side of the building. My bedroom was on the east side. I kept my eyes on my book, resisting the urge to look toward the window. "She's approaching your floor," Martinez continued. Stay calm. Let her make the first move. I heard a faint scraping sound at my window, the sound of someone testing whether it was locked. I'd deliberately left it unlocked as part of our plan, though I'd secured the screen to make it appear normal. The scraping continued, then stopped. For several seconds there was silence. Then I heard the screen being carefully removed. I kept my eyes on my book, but moved slightly to get a better view of the window from the corner of my eye. The curtains moved as the window slid open slowly, silently. A hand appeared at the edge of the curtain, then an arm, then a face. Olivia Wright looked exactly like the woman who had called herself Emily Parker, except her blonde hair was loose around her shoulders now instead of pulled back. Her eyes, fixed on me, had the same intense focus I remembered from our first meeting at the funeral home. I pretended to notice movement, looking up from my book with a startled expression. Our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then she smiled, a cold expression that never reached her eyes. "Hello, James," she said softly. "I've been looking for you." Before I could respond, Thomas burst through the bedroom door, baseball bat raised. Olivia looked toward him. She started to go through the window, but Martinez's voice shouted through our earpieces, "Move in! Now!" The room turned to chaos. 2 officers appeared at the window behind Olivia, grabbing her arms. She fought with surprising strength, managing to pull one arm free and reach into her jacket pocket. Thomas jumped forward, knocking whatever she was reaching for out of her hand. It fell to the floor, a syringe filled with clear liquid. "Olivia Wright," Martinez said from the doorway, gun drawn. "You're under arrest for breaking and entering, identity theft, corpse desecration, and attempted assault." She stopped struggling as the officers handcuffed her, her eyes never leaving my face. "You don't understand what you've interrupted," she said, her voice eerily calm. "The experiment was working until the body was compromised." "Take her out," Martinez ordered. The officers led her through my apartment and out the front door. Thomas picked up the syringe with a tissue, carefully placing it in an evidence bag an officer provided. "What do you think was in this?" "We'll have it analyzed," Martinez said. "My guess is some kind of sedative." I sat on the edge of my bed, suddenly exhausted. "It's over?" "It's over," Martinez confirmed. "We'll need you both to come to the station tomorrow to give formal statements, but for tonight, you're safe." After the officers left, taking Olivia to central booking, Martinez stayed behind to debrief us. "She'll be arraigned in the morning. With the evidence we have, plus the attempted assault tonight, she'll be denied bail." "Has she said anything about why she did all this?" I asked. "Not much. During initial questioning, she kept repeating that the experiment was working until Michael's body was compromised. She claims the technology she developed can temporarily restore neural activity in deceased brains." "That's impossible," Thomas said. Martinez shrugged. "Probably." She also said something about allowing final messages to be delivered, as if her technology could let the dead communicate one last time. I thought about the voice from Michael's body, not her son. Was that Michael trying to tell us something, or just a pre-programmed message from Olivia's device? "She's clearly delusional," Martinez continued. "The ME confirmed that no technology currently exists that could make a decomposing body stand upright or open its eyes days after death. But we saw it happen," I said quietly. Martinez gave me a long look. "I know. And I don't have an explanation for that. Maybe we never will." After Martinez left, Thomas and I sat in the living room. It was late, but neither of us felt like sleeping. "You think she's crazy?" Thomas asked. "Olivia?" I thought about the question. "I think she believes in what she's doing. Whether that's delusion or something else, I don't know." "You don't actually think she found a way to make the dead speak, do you?" I remembered Michael's body against the mausoleum wall, his eyes catching our flashlights, and that weird voice coming from his mouth. I don't know what to think anymore. We both saw something that shouldn't have been possible. Thomas was quiet for a moment. When I was in the spare room tonight waiting, I kept thinking about what you said she told you at the cemetery, that Michael was supposed to wake up. What if she wasn't being metaphorical? You mean she literally expected him to regain consciousness? That's not possible. Maybe not consciousness as we understand it, but some kind of, I don't know, temporary neural activity, enough to open eyes, produce sounds, even basic motor functions. I thought about my background in electrical engineering, about the signals that control muscle movement, about the complex systems that allow a brain to communicate with a body. Even if you could stimulate those pathways somehow, I said slowly, it wouldn't work after decomposition had begun. The physical structures would be breaking down. Unless her device did something we don't understand yet, Thomas suggested. We stayed up talking until dawn, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. By morning, we were no closer to answers, but at least the immediate threat was over. Olivia Wright was in custody, and whatever she had been trying to do with Michael Parker's body had been stopped. As we got ready to go to the police station to give our statements, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still missing something important. Olivia had been so confident, so sure her experiment was working, and we had seen things that didn't make sense. A dead body standing, eyes opening, a voice speaking days after death should have made such things impossible. Martinez thought she was just crazy, but after what I'd seen, I wasn't sure her explanation was completely wrong. Something had happened in that cemetery, something beyond what current science could explain. I couldn't help feeling that we'd only scratched the surface of understanding what she had actually done. 1 week had passed since Olivia Wright's arrest, but I still couldn't sleep through the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael Parker's body standing against that mausoleum wall, eyes open in death, that mechanical voice coming from his throat. The image followed me through my days at the funeral home, where Robert had given me easier tasks to help me recover. Thomas had stayed longer in Portland, sleeping on my couch and keeping an eye on me. I hadn't asked him to stay, but I was glad he was there. The apartment felt less empty, less vulnerable with him around. "You sure you want to do this?" Thomas asked as we pulled into the county jail parking lot. The building was a gray concrete structure with narrow windows and chain-link fences topped with razor wire. "No," I admitted, turning off the engine. "But I need answers." We'd arranged the meeting through Detective Martinez, who didn't want to help at first. "She's manipulative," he'd warned, "and she's still fixated on you, James. I don't think giving her access to you is a good idea." But I'd insisted. The questions kept me awake at night, and I knew I wouldn't find peace until I understood why she'd done what she did, why she'd chosen Michael, why she'd chosen me. The intake process was a pain. Signing forms, giving up our phones and wallets, walking through a metal detector, being patted down by guards who looked bored with their job. Finally, we were taken to a small room with a table bolted to the floor and 3 plastic chairs. A guard stood outside the door, visible through a small window. "She'll be brought in shortly," the guard told us before closing the door. Thomas and I sat in silence. I wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The door opened 10 minutes later. Olivia Wright entered with handcuffs on, wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on her. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and without makeup she looked older, with more lines around her eyes. But her stare was just as intense when she looked at me. A guard uncuffed her and stepped back outside, watching through the window. "James Wilson," she said, her voice surprisingly soft. "I wondered if you'd come." She sat down across from us, folding her hands neatly on the table. Her nails were short and clean, her fingers long and slender, surgeon's hands. "This is my brother Thomas," I said. She barely looked at him. "Yes, I know. I've been watching what you do for some time." Her casual admission sent a chill through me. "Why?" I asked. "Why me? Why any of this?" Olivia tilted her head slightly, looking at me like I was under a microscope. Do you believe people stay conscious after they die, James? That's not an answer. But it's the right question, she replied. The fundamental question that drove my research. What happens to consciousness when the body dies? Does it simply blink out of existence? Or does it persist in some form, unable to communicate with the physical world? Thomas moved in his chair. We didn't come here for a philosophy lecture. Olivia kept looking at me. My work connects life and death, not permanently. The brain tissue breaks down too much for that. But for a short time right after someone dies, we can talk to them. With Michael Parker? I asked. He was an ideal subject, she said, her voice taking on an almost reverent quality. Young, healthy brain tissue, and his own interests aligned perfectly with my research. Did you know he was experimenting with electronic voice phenomena? Trying to capture communications from the dead? We found his online posts, I said. But that doesn't explain how you got his body. Her face stayed blank, but something flashed in her eyes. Pride, maybe. I listened to police and emergency radio calls. When I heard about the bridge accident, I went there. During all the confusion, with different agencies showing up, it was easy to act like a medical examiner. I found Michael from his student ID and got his body moved to a place where I could work. The way she so casually talked about stealing a dead teenager's body made me feel sick. You took him before the authorities even told his family? His parents were already dead, she said dismissively, and time was essential. The neural tissue begins degrading immediately after death. I had to implant the device within hours to have any chance of success. So the real Michael had been dead for days before the funeral, Thomas said. Olivia nodded. The funeral was merely a controlled environment where I could monitor the experiment. The camera was designed to document the post-mortem neural response when triggered by a remote signal. A signal you sent at 2:17 a.m., I said, remembering the timing of the phone calls. Yes, a specific frequency that stimulated the device implanted at his brainstem. It was supposed to create a temporary bridge, allowing any lingering consciousness to manipulate the vocal apparatus. But it didn't work, I said. When you checked the camera footage at the cemetery, you were angry. Her jaw tightened slightly, the first crack in her composed facade. The signal was sent, but there was no response. I believed you had somehow interfered with the transmission. Why would you think that? Your background, she said simply. I researched local funeral homes extensively before selecting Thompson's. Most employ people with mortuary science degrees or family connections to the business. But you were different. An electrical engineer working in a funeral home. It was intriguing. I felt a cold weight in my stomach. You found that in my job application. Yes. It's public information if you know where to look. I thought perhaps you might understand my work. That's why I selected you to handle Michael's arrangements. The realization that she had chosen me specifically, had researched me before we ever met, made me feel violated in a way I couldn't articulate. But then something did happen, Thomas interjected. The body at the cemetery, it stood up. It spoke. Olivia moved closer, her eyes lit up. Yes, the experiment worked, just not when or how I expected. The signal needed time to hook up with the leftover brain connections. When it finally did, it said, "Not her son," I reminded her, over and over. She sat back with a small smile. Fascinating, isn't it? A message from beyond death. Michael Parker communicating a truth, that I was not his mother, even though I claimed to be. Or it was just your device playing a pre-recorded message, Thomas countered. Olivia's smile disappeared. The device could only make vibrations that the vocal parts shaped. It couldn't make words by itself. The message came from whatever was left of Michael Parker's brain. I remembered the cemetery and seeing that rotting body standing up. The medical examiner said your device couldn't have made the body stand or the eyes open. Current scientific understanding is limited, she said dismissively. What you witnessed was proof that my research has moved beyond those limitations. You're delusional, Thomas said flatly. Olivia's eyes lit up with anger for the first time. I've created technology that can connect life and death, letting people talk to the dead one last time. Do you know what that means? For science, for everyone, for people who never got to say goodbye. It means you desecrated a young man's body, I said quietly. You stole him from his family, experimented on him without consent, and used him for your own purposes. She stared at me for a long moment. You still don't understand, but others do. My research materials remain secure, and others will continue the work I've begun. A chill ran through me. What others? You worked alone. For this phase, yes, but I've documented everything. The right people will find it, and they'll understand its importance. The guard tapped on the window, signaling that our time was almost up. I leaned forward. Why are you telling us this? Because you've seen the proof, James. You witnessed what others would dismiss as impossible. Deep down, you know my work has value, even if you can't admit it to yourself. The guard opened the door. Time's up. Olivia stood, still looking right at me. The dead have messages for the living, James. My technology simply gives them a voice. As the guard took her away, she looked back over her shoulder. Check your phone tonight. One final gift for your trouble. Thomas and I sat in the car for several minutes after leaving the jail, thinking about what we'd heard. She's completely detached from reality, Thomas said finally. Talking about bridging life and death like she's discussing a new cell phone feature. I held the steering wheel tight. But we saw it happen, Thomas. We saw Michael's body stand up days after death. We heard that voice. There has to be a scientific explanation. What if her explanation is the scientific one? What if she really did find a way to, I don't know, temporarily restore neural activity in a dead brain? Thomas turned to face me. Listen to yourself. You're starting to sound like her. He was right. I started the car, trying to shake off Olivia's influence. Let's get out of here. We spent the rest of the day trying to return to normal. Thomas suggested we catch a movie, something mindless with explosions and car chases to clear our heads. It helped briefly. We grabbed dinner at a burger place afterward, talking about anything except Olivia Wright and Michael Parker. But as we returned to my apartment that evening, her final words stuck in my head. Check your phone tonight. One final gift for your trouble. My phone was on the kitchen counter where I'd left it that morning. As I picked it up, it buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Just coordinates, nothing else. I showed Thomas. It's from her. How? She's in jail. She must have arranged it beforehand, set it to send automatically. Thomas took the phone, typing the coordinates into a mapping app. It's in Portland, some kind of industrial area near the waterfront. I looked over his shoulder at the map. About 20 minutes from here. We should call Martinez, Thomas said. I nodded, but didn't make any move to do so. Part of me wanted to see what Olivia had left for us without getting the police involved. Thomas saw my face. Don't even think about it. We're not going there alone. What if it's her research? What if there's evidence of other victims? All the more reason to let the police handle it. He was right, of course. I called Martinez, who answered on the second ring. I explained about our visit to Olivia and the coordinates we'd received. I'll check it out, he said. Stay put. We can meet you there, I offered. There was a pause on the line. Fine, but you wait for me outside. Don't go in until I arrive with backup. We agreed and left. The coordinates took us to an old warehouse in a mostly empty industrial area near the Portland waterfront. The building was a big concrete structure with broken windows and walls covered in graffiti. A chain-link fence was around the property, but the gate was open, its lock broken a while ago. We parked across the street and waited, watching the building quietly. Martinez showed up 15 minutes later in an unmarked car with a patrol unit and 2 uniformed officers following behind. "Stay behind us," Martinez instructed as he approached, hand resting on his holstered weapon. The warehouse door had a padlock on it, but it was new, shiny next to the rusted door, clearly added after the building was left empty. Martinez told one of the officers to cut it with bolt cutters. Inside was huge and mostly empty, with high ceilings and concrete floors. Our flashlights lit up the dark, showing dust floating in the air. The place smelled like mildew and some chemical I couldn't name. "Over there," Thomas said, pointing to the far corner where a plastic tarp covered what looked like equipment. Martinez came closer with care, his gun out. He pulled back the tarp to find a makeshift laboratory, tables with electronic equipment, a computer setup, and surgical tools placed neatly on a metal tray. And journals, dozens of them, stacked in neat piles. "Clear," Martinez called after checking behind the equipment. He holstered his weapon and pulled on latex gloves from his pocket. I moved closer, looking at the setup. It looked like a university research lab, but rougher, built from whatever Olivia could get. The computer needed a password, but the journals were open. Martinez picked one up and looked through it. His face got dark. "Jesus." He handed it to me. The journal had detailed notes and drawings of Olivia's experiments, first on rats and small animals, then on bigger mammals. Each entry showed how she put more advanced devices into the brain stems of recently dead subjects, then tried to stimulate brain activity after death. The last pages had photos, grainy pictures of animals with open eyes after death, positioned in weird poses. The notes next to them described successful temporary reanimation of motor functions and evidence of residual consciousness. "There's more," Thomas said, opening another journal. This one contained human experiments. The photos showed dead bodies with devices like the one in Michael Parker. Most entries ended with "failed to respond to stimulation" or "no evidence of neural activity." Until Michael. His entry was the most detailed, with pages of notes about his ideal neural profile and how his pre-existing interest in talking to the dead created optimal conditions for keeping his consciousness. "She was recording everything," Martinez said, examining a small camera mounted on a tripod near the tables, documenting her experiments. He found a stack of memory cards labeled with dates and subject numbers. The most recent was marked Subject 17, M. Parker, Final Transmission. "We need to get a forensics team in here," Martinez said, pulling out his phone. I don't even have words for what this is." While he called for backup, Thomas and I continued examining the lab. In a metal cabinet, we found more evidence of Olivia's work, prototype devices in various stages of development, technical diagrams, and a folder containing what appeared to be correspondence with research foundations and private laboratories. "She was trying to get funding," I said, scanning the letters. Most were rejections, citing ethical concerns or insufficient scientific basis. But a few expressed interest in her novel approach to post-mortem neural stimulation. "She told us others would continue her work," Thomas remembered. "Maybe she was in contact with people who shared her interests." Martinez came back after making his call. "Forensics team is on the way. We need to document everything exactly as we found it." He took the folder from me. "This could help us identify any potential accomplices." "She said she worked alone on this phase," I recalled, "but she was trying to reach out to others." Martinez nodded grimly. "We'll investigate every name in these documents." The forensics team arrived 20 minutes later, and we stepped back to let them work. They took pictures of everything, listed the journals and equipment, and started collecting evidence. Martinez led us outside for some fresh air. The night had gotten cold, and I zipped up my jacket. "The DA will want to talk to both of you," he said. "This evidence strengthens the case against Wright significantly. We're looking at multiple charges now: corpse desecration, identity theft, breaking and entering, and possibly illegal medical experimentation." "Will it go public?" Thomas asked. Martinez sighed. Something this weird? Absolutely. The press will go crazy once they hear about it. Mad scientist tries to reanimate the dead, makes for quite a headline. I thought about Robert and Sarah, about the Thompson Funeral Home's reputation. The funeral home wasn't involved. They had no idea what she was doing. We'll make that clear, Martinez assured me. But you should prepare yourselves. This case is going to attract attention. He was right. By the next morning, local news outlets had picked up the story. By afternoon, it had gone national. Portland woman arrested for macabre experiments on the dead, read one headline. Funeral home worker uncovers gruesome plot, read another. Robert called me early, his voice tight with stress. The phone's been ringing nonstop. Reporters want statements. Current clients are calling to make sure their loved ones are safe. I'm sorry, I said, though it wasn't my fault. What can I do? Nothing right now. Sarah and I are handling it. Just be careful what you say if reporters contact you. Thomas and I spent the day at my apartment, ignoring the knocks on the door from reporters who had somehow gotten my address. We watched the news coverage feeling completely disconnected, seeing the case turned into a wild crime story instead of the complicated, disturbing experience we'd been through. The reports focused on the gross stuff, the stolen body, digging up the grave, the homemade lab. Almost no one mentioned the science behind what Olivia had tried to do, and nobody took her claims about connecting life and death seriously. They're missing the point, I said, as we watched a news anchor describe Olivia as a deranged former researcher. What point? Thomas asked. That she might actually have succeeded in temporarily reanimating a dead body? I don't know. Maybe. I ran a hand through my hair in frustration. We saw something in that cemetery that can't be explained by current scientific understanding. Doesn't that matter? Thomas studied me with concern. You're not buying into her delusions, are you? I'm just saying there are questions that haven't been answered. How did Michael's body stand upright days after death? How did his eyes open? The ME said her device shouldn't have been capable of causing muscle movement, yet we saw it happen. And the alternative explanation is, what? That she found a way to temporarily restore consciousness to the dead? When he put it that way, it did sound absurd. But I couldn't forget that night in the cemetery, Michael's eyes catching the light from our flashlights and that robotic voice coming from his throat. Not her son. Later that evening, Martinez called with an update. The forensics team had found video files from Olivia's camera, including footage of her experiments on Michael Parker's body before the funeral. It's disturbing, Martinez warned, but it confirms she was working alone. The video shows her performing the implantation procedure herself, testing the device, and preparing. The 6 months went by like a weird dream. The news stopped talking about Olivia Wright's case, moving on to new scandals and tragedies. For me, time didn't really heal anything. It just put some space between what happened and my daily life so I could function, even if I couldn't forget. I sat in the witness box at the Portland courthouse, keeping my hands in my lap to hide how they shook a little. The courtroom was smaller than I thought it would be, with wood walls and hard benches. Olivia sat at the defense table with her blonde hair pulled back tight, wearing a plain gray suit that made her look like any normal working woman. Only her eyes showed who she really was, that same intense, calculating look fixed on me while I testified. "And what did you observe when you arrived at the cemetery?" the prosecutor asked. I recounted the story for what felt like the 100th time, finding Michael's empty grave, following the drag marks to the mausoleum, discovering his body standing upright against the wall. "And you're certain the body was standing unassisted?" the prosecutor pressed. "Yes, it was upright, with its back against the wall. When the voice stopped, it collapsed to the ground. And this voice, can you describe it again for the court?" I swallowed hard. It was mechanical, sounding all weird. It said the same thing over and over. Not her son. From her seat, Olivia smiled slightly. It made me feel really cold. The defense attorney tried to say I was super stressed and might have seen things wrong. He suggested that Robert and I moved the body ourselves, maybe damaging it while looking at it when we shouldn't have. But the medical examiner had already confirmed they found the electronic device in Michael's brainstem, and the police found all of Olivia's research stuff in the warehouse. The evidence was too strong. After a 2-week trial, the jury only talked for less than 4 hours before they decided guilty on all charges. The judge gave Olivia 15 years in prison with no chance of getting out for at least 10. As the bailiff took her away, she turned to look at me one last time. She didn't look angry or beaten. She looked happy, almost like she won something, like she got exactly what she wanted. After the trial, I met with the Parker family's relatives who came from Ohio for the court case. Michael's aunt and uncle were quiet, dignified people still trying to understand how they lost their brother, sister-in-law, and nephew in the bridge accident, only to have Michael's body stolen and messed with. "We just want to take them home now," Michael's aunt told me, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. They should be together. The court had finally released the bodies for proper burial. Michael, Jennifer, and William Parker would be buried in their hometown cemetery in Columbus, where the family could visit them and begin the healing process that Olivia had stopped. I went to the small service held in Portland before the bodies were taken to Ohio. It was a simple, heartfelt ceremony, nothing like the fake funeral Olivia had arranged. Standing at the back of the chapel, I watched as Michael's relatives shared memories of the family, showing who they had been in life. William's dry humor, Jennifer's dedication to her students, Michael's smart mind, and curiosity about the world. It should have brought closure. The case was solved, the criminal in prison, the victims properly laid to rest. But as I drove home from the service, I felt a heaviness that wouldn't go away. Something big had changed in how I saw the world, and I couldn't return to who I was before. 2 weeks later, I quit my job at Thompson Funeral Home. Robert didn't seem surprised when I gave him the letter. We sat in his office in the late afternoon sun. "I understand," he said, setting the letter aside without reading it. "After what you've been through, no one would expect you to stay." "It's not about the trauma," I tried to explain. "It's just, I can't look at death the same way anymore. I can't treat it as something final and absolute when I've seen..." I trailed off, not sure how to explain what I'd seen or what it meant. Robert nodded slowly. "Some questions don't have answers, James. Sometimes we just have to live with the mystery." But I'd never been good at living with mysteries. My engineering mind wanted explanations, solutions, closure. And after the trial and conviction, I still hadn't found any of those things. I moved to Burlington, Vermont the following month. Thomas helped me pack up my apartment and drive the U-Haul north. The city looked beautiful in early spring, with the snow melting from the Green Mountains and Lake Champlain shining in the distance. It felt clean, new, far away from what I'd left behind. I found a job with a small engineering firm that specialized in renewable energy systems. The work was challenging and good, designing electrical components for solar arrays and wind turbines, helping create sustainable power solutions. My colleagues were friendly but not nosy, and no one knew about my connection to the Portland body snatcher case, as the media had called it. For a while, I almost convinced myself I was moving on. I rented a small house on the outskirts of town, adopted a dog from the local shelter, a middle-aged black lab mix named Cooper, who liked to sleep at my feet while I worked from home. I set up routines, made a few casual friends, even went on a couple of dates that didn't go anywhere, but at least got me out of the house. But at night, when Cooper was snoring softly on his bed and the house made settling noises, the questions would come back. The medical experts at the trial never really explained how Michael's eyes had opened or how his body had stood up days after death. Olivia's device should only have been able to make sound, not control muscle movement in a dead body. I'd read the expert testimonies multiple times. They used phrases like unknown mechanism and unexplained phenomenon, while finally blaming what Robert and I had seen on some mix of rigor mortis, gas buildup in the body, and our own stress-related perceptions. But we knew what we'd seen, and Olivia knew what she'd done. 4 months after moving to Burlington, I got a call from Robert. We'd stayed in touch with occasional texts and emails, but this was the first time he'd called since I'd left Portland. "How's Vermont treating you?" he asked after we exchanged pleasantries. "Good, quiet, different." I was sitting on my back porch watching Cooper investigate something in the yard. "How are things at the funeral home?" There was a pause before he answered. "That's actually why I'm calling. Something odd happened yesterday." I felt my chest tighten. "What kind of odd?" "We received an inquiry from a research foundation, the New England Institute for Neurological Studies. They wanted information about our embalming techniques." "That doesn't sound too unusual," I said, though I was already on alert. "They specifically asked about the Parker case, how we'd prepared the body, what chemicals we'd used, whether we'd noticed anything unusual during the process." Cooper had abandoned his investigation and was looking at me now, sensing my tension. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "Nothing. I said all case information was confidential and had been part of a criminal investigation. But they were persistent, offered to pay for any documentation we could provide." "Did you get a name?" "Who was asking?" "Dr. Eleanor Voss. She said she was conducting research on tissue preservation techniques." Robert paused. I looked her up afterward. She specializes in experimental neuroscience. Her recent publications focus on neural activity after clinical death. "Just like Olivia." "Have you told Martinez?" I asked. "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. It might be nothing, just academic interest in a high-profile case." But we both knew it probably wasn't nothing. After we hung up, I spent the evening researching the New England Institute for Neurological Studies. It was a private research foundation based in Boston, established 5 years ago with funding from several technology companies and private donors. Their website described their mission as exploring the frontiers of neuroscience to develop innovative treatments for neurological disorders. Dr. Eleanor Voss's profile showed impressive credentials: PhD from MIT, research positions at Johns Hopkins and Harvard Medical School, many publications in respected journals, but her most recent work had moved into more controversial territory, with papers on persistent neural activity patterns post-mortem and electrical stimulation protocols for dormant neural tissue. I dug deeper, looking for any connection between Dr. Voss and Olivia Wright. They hadn't published together or worked at the same places, but they had both attended a symposium on emerging technologies in neuroscience 3 years ago in Boston. It was thin, but it was something. The next day I tried accessing academic databases to read Dr. Voss's full papers, using my old university credentials. Most were behind paywalls, but I managed to download a few. The language was technical and heavy, but the message was clear. Dr. Voss was researching how to maintain or restore brain activity after death. Just like Olivia. I spent the next week constantly researching the Institute and Dr. Voss, looking for any direct connection to Olivia or her work. I created a spreadsheet tracking their publications, conference appearances, and research grants. The more I looked, the more similarities I found in their research interests and methods. Then suddenly, I hit a wall. My university credentials no longer worked on the academic databases. When I tried creating a new account, I got error messages. When I tried to access the Institute's website, I found it had been updated. Dr. Voss's profile was gone, and the research section had been cleaned of any papers related to postmortem neural activity. Someone had noticed my searches and cut off my access. That night, I checked all my doors and windows before going to bed. Cooper sensed I was nervous and stayed close, sleeping at the foot of my bed instead of in his usual spot in the living room. I lay awake for hours, listening to the sounds of the house, before finally falling into a restless sleep. The phone rang at exactly 2:17 a.m. I woke up suddenly. Cooper raised his head, alert, but not barking. The phone kept ringing on my nightstand, the screen lighting up the dark room with a harsh blue light. Unknown number. For a moment, I thought about not answering, but I knew ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. I picked up the phone. Hello? No one spoke, but I heard breathing on the line, slow, labored, with a slight mechanical quality to it. The same sound I'd heard in those calls months ago, before everything happened with Michael Parker. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. The breathing continued for several seconds, then stopped. The call ended. I sat in the dark, phone still in my hand, as I realized what this meant. Someone had kept going with Olivia's research. Someone knew who I was, where I lived, and could use the same methods Olivia had used to contact me before. And they were reaching out now. I didn't wait for morning. I packed a bag with clothes and basics, grabbed Cooper's food and leash, and put everything in my car. I took out cash from an ATM, enough to last a few weeks. I left my phone on the kitchen counter. They could track it there. As I drove away from Burlington in the early morning darkness with Cooper sitting quietly next to me, I had no real destination in mind. Just away. Somewhere they couldn't find me. I had no intention of becoming part of their next experiment.